Hey all, it's AJ here from Sports Chaplaincy South Africa. I'll admit today's call-up podcast got me straight in the feels. Our Nadin talks to Paralympian Niel Louw. Despite a tragic accident in his teens that resulted in an amputation, he helps us through his own story understand the greater purpose behind life's setbacks. He shows us how God's plan is to use us way beyond the podiums that we determine for ourselves and prepares us in his own way for the purpose beyond this competition. It's an inspirational and ongoing story of living and serving from a place of gratitude despite personal tragedy. If you're enjoying our work, give us a like and a share on your socials and find us on all the top podcast apps like Podbean, Google Podcasts and Apple, and search for the Call Up Podcast, where faith meets sport and life. Call Up is hosting our very first breakfast where you can meet us in person and guests like JP Duminy. It's on the 20th of May and you can grab a ticket on quicket.co.za and search for the Call Up Sports Breakfast where faith meets sport and life, and we get to meet you in person. Don't miss it.
The Call Up Podcast, where faith meets sport and life. This is brought to you by Sports Chaplaincy South Africa.
Well, I'm delighted to welcome to this edition of the Call Up Podcast a man who, he will be reluctant to use this, but a man I believe is a legend in his sport and a legend in South African sport. And I think I can say this as a Brit. I don't think we always cherish our legends in South Africa in the way that we should. I'm thinking of Lucas Radebe, the Leeds United player. When he goes back to Leeds, his story and his contribution is honoured in a way that it's not always honoured in South Africa. And I think it's true also of the man who is in front of me today, a man who has got multiple medals at the Paralympics and at World Championships and is an All-African champion. But a man who's got an incredible story of how God has worked through the toughest of seasons for his glory and honour. And I've got no doubt as you listen to this story today that your life will be touched by what you hear. So Niel, it's really good to have you on the Call Up Podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Bruce, for the opportunity. I'm really grateful and really looking forward to a wonderful time together. And may God be glorified in our conversation.
Well, I've already touched upon all the medals. I should have asked you to bring them, but that would then have made you a weightlifting champion because there's some fairly weighty ones there. But before we kind of dive into, that part of your story, like every young person, many young people growing up in South Africa, you loved your sports. When did you start playing sport? What were the sports you excelled at as a youngster?
You need to look back many years ago. I was blessed and privileged to grow up in a house where my parents were very much supportive. They were devoted Christians, and I was exposed to Christian principles and values from an early age. And during that time, my dad was a very keen sports lover, and I think that sparked also the enthusiasm and the passion for me to participate myself. And I remember since primary school days, I was always either cheering along for teams or participating myself, especially rugby, tennis, and athletics, as a matter of fact. I had happy childhood days, by God's grace. Even my teenage years were actually pleasant, not really exposed to anything in terms of adversity or a tragedy of anything of that nature. It was just smooth going.
So life was safe and life was good.
Good, carefree days, really, in retrospect.
And as you were playing your sport, as a youngster, as a teenager, what were some of your dreams and aspirations?
I remember that I was selected for sports teams at school level, the ones that I mentioned, however, not receiving provincial or national colours at that stage. But I was always dreaming, standing on a podium, competing on a higher level, who knows, even on international level later on, not knowing what would follow in years to come.
So let's maybe go there, because there you are, as you just described, a pretty carefree life, and you've acknowledged, it was pretty easy, it was pretty comfortable. And then 1984. Boxing Day.
Absolutely.
December the 26th.
That's right.
Tell us what
November.
happened.
On that specific day, we were on holiday in the Southern Cape, visiting a small town, Buffalo Bay, close by George and Nyasna, I would say. So on the day, we went sailing with a catamaran. We were invited by our friends to enjoy the day at the Lake Swartvlei. So my brother, my friend, and myself, we were towing a catamaran down a dirt road towards the lake when the mast touched overhead electrical power lines. And in a flash, the whole boat, the little sailing boat, was electrified, and 11,000 volts subsequently surged through our bodies. And we were
Hold on,
conscious.
11,000 volts went through the catamaran
Absolutely so.
and through you.
Yes, it was an absolute miracle that we survived that accident. Due to the third-degree burning wounds that we sustained, all three of us.
So you survived, but there were still fairly significant injuries, right?
Absolutely so. It was burning wounds, and that mean in order to save our lives, they had to amputate limbs.
Wow.
And later on also do some skin grafts in wherever we were injured to that extent. So it was a battle for survival, actually, initially.
Yeah.
And we just realized that we had been given a second chance in life.
Yeah. Now here you are, 16 years of age. You've just suffered this horrific accident, along with your brother and friend, and you've lost your left arm, right?
Yes. What happened is they had to amputate my left arm, my brother's right arm, and leg below the knee, as well as the toes of his left foot, as well as my friend Henny's right arm. So we all lost limbs, but by God's grace, no internal injuries or brain damage, which could have easily been the case.
Yeah.
So medically speaking, looking back retrospectively, a godly intervention, which actually granted us a second chance in life, as I've said.
But this still has huge implications, doesn't it? You're
Yeah,
16-year-old, you've got dreams, and suddenly you've not got an arm. And what sort of questions and thoughts were going through your mind at the moment? What impact did this have on your faith?
Well, suddenly the future was very uncertain to me, and I was not sure of my own capabilities. And being during that time sort of in God's university of adversity, in a sense, I realized later.
That's a great phrase. University of adversity.
Yeah.
Life, right?
I believe that I was sort of prepared and equipped for my future, although I didn't understand it at that moment in time. So my desire was to serve the Lord more diligently, being a Christian already during that time, having realized that I had, as I've said, been given a second chance in life. And the reality dawned on me during that time that joy isn't found in the absence of something, but in the presence of God.
Wow.
So in the ensuing months of pain, discomfort, and despair, I was increasingly becoming aware that nothing can separate me from the love of God.
Yeah.
What we read also in Romans 8:38 and 39. By God's grace, I adapted to my single-handedness, and God turned these disadvantages into witnessing opportunities by its grace. And what happened is that I resumed my schoolwork. Once again, I was 16 years old, and also and entered the competitive sport arena once again.
So having begun this process of recovery, you now got to participate in sport without your arm, and you do.
It's actually amazing. 2 weeks after the accident, the surgeon, just having lost my left arm, the surgeon told me that he felt confident that I would participate in sport once again.
Wow.
Little did we realize then that 8 years later I would represent South Africa at the Paralympic Games in Barcelona. So it was just amazing. For me, it was a battle for survival. And all of a sudden, the possibilities occur for me to compete again. And what was amazing, even at school level, I started competing not only in athletics, but rugby and tennis against so-called able-bodied sports people. And that still remains one of the most memorable moments in my life.
So I think that's crucial for people to hear. You go back to playing sport, and you don't participate initially in all ability sport. You just go back competing with your peers.
Yeah, it was absolutely amazing. I mean, it was as though my sporting career has only been temporarily interrupted for some time. But what I can say is my introduction to sport for people with disabilities really opened new doors for me and afforded me with opportunities that I never would have encountered. And that came basically by just a person knocking on my door in a wheelchair, introducing me to sport for people with disabilities. And my first reaction was, well, am I disabled? What does it mean to be a person with a disability? Because I by God's grace, I've adapted, as I've said, to my single-handedness, and I was back at school and I was continuing with my daily activities. So it was a process for me to accept the fact that there were opportunities for me to compete against athletes with similar limitations than my own. And that would just open new doors for me.
So when did you start competing with other people in that all-ability setting?
That was in 1986 when I was in my matric year. At that time, my brother and friend also competed as juniors. I remember the SA Championships in Bloemfontein, and we just wanted to compete. So we entered for all events, basically. Not only track events. I mean, I was a sprinter from primary school days, 100, 200, later on 400 meters, a long jump. But we even did some field events. And my brother, who was actually a hurdler, he decided, well, he'll go for field events. My friend, he did some long distance running. So it was amazing, our first exposure to this. And it just sparked an eagerness and just something to go beyond and to make the most of this opportunity afforded and to keep on participating. And yeah, it worked out well for me in some years thereafter.
So at what point did you realize that actually you would be able to compete at the highest level?
In 1991, I remember, I received Springbok colours during those days. It's quite interesting. And then in 1992, a year thereafter, I was part of a South African team of about 10 people presenting the country at the Paralympic Games in Barcelona. It was my first exposure to an international major sport event of that extent, and I was absolutely overwhelmed. It was a unique opportunity, although I remember, thinking back, it was just after the isolation years. We still had to generate some funds on our own. We didn't have a truly united team in a sense, not a national flag or anthem even yet. But it was the beginning. It was the start, at least. And for me personally, having competed against 3,000 athletes from more than 100 countries, each with their own unique disability, was absolutely overwhelming. For me, that was all those who actually had come to terms with their own disability and triumph over it. For me, they represented what I've heard, human triumph, courage, and endeavor. And that actually touched my life in a sense. And
the true spirit, the true spirit of sport.
Absolutely, the true spirit of sport, that universal language that's being spoken. I just felt I belonged there. I connected with them. And it was as if my personal world have only been expanded. Not only opportunities to compete against able bodies, in a sense, in preparing for events like that.
So many people would say was an event that many would assume would limit you.
Correctly
God has used in a way to completely smash open the possibilities.
Absolutely, definitely so. And by God's grace, I've obtained 2 medals in the 200 and 400 meter sprinting events in the class.
I told everyone you were a legend, right?
At that time, they call it still my class TS4. Later, it becomes T46. It's people all with one arm, basically, apart from the other limbs which are actually not affected. So, that was an amazing time together. My wife also attended, she cheered along, and it just was the beginning of a journey for me in the international arena.
Yeah, and I know subsequently, you picked up medals at the World Champs, and then 96 comes a huge Olympics in Atlanta with big crowds for the Paralympics.
Correctly so.
As I recall. And of course, by 96, things have changed considerably in South Africa, haven't they? I mean, you just said no flag, no anthem, everything's in transition. That's changed in 96.
Definitely so.
Just tell us about
that. That was fantastic, Bruce, actually, to be a member of a truly united team representing the whole country, basically. All of a sudden, we were proud having our own flag. Still one of the best Paralympic teams who left our shores. A much bigger team, as a matter of fact, than 92. I entered for the 100, 200 and 400 events once again. Well, in a sense, not to my own benefit and favor, because it was a challenge, the program and the schedule as such, since two of my finals were just one day apart, one night apart. And I think in a sense that affected also my performance. But I'm grateful to say that I still won one bronze medal in the 200 meters, which was very, very special.
People are beginning to understand why I say if you bought your medals, you would have been weighed down.
Yeah, and I will always treasure that as well in the 96. Unfortunately, my wife couldn't attend. My eldest son was only 10 days old, so she had to look after him and stay at home. Okay. But my dad, he came along. He was part of a supporting group, and we journeyed along and we spent quality time together, which was very special.
So you're competing at the highest level in your sport. But there's one athlete. There's always that one athlete, isn't there? That just like Usain Bolt for many years in the 100 meters. You had that guy. You had your in the nicest, friendliest way. You had your arch nemesis. Tell us a little bit about it.
That's a fact. Well, actually, I met him the first time in Barcelona in 1992 when we were competing in the 100 and 200 meter events. And what I can remember of that was that he set the 2 world records.
This is a Nigerian, right?
The Nigerian Ajibola Adeyo, brilliant athlete. He was born with one arm, basically. He set the world records in the 100 and 200, which was 10:72 and 21:83. Brilliant times. I was running against him as well in 96. He won again. And then 1999 was the opportunity in South Africa, home soil, where I would meet him once again in the 200 meter final.
This is at the All Africa Games.
All African Games in Johannesburg. And that was also a very special event.
Call Up is hosting our very first breakfast where you can meet us in person and guests like JP Duminy. It's on the 20th of May and you can grab a ticket on cricket.co.za and search for the Call Up Sports Breakfast where faith meets sport and life and we get to meet you in person. Don't miss it.
So you beat your arch nemesis.
Well, you guessed correctly, but I was definitely not the favorite for the race. It was such a unique opportunity to meet once again. We've had a great time also off the track, and strangely enough, during that race, when we entered the final stretch towards the finishing line, I think the last 20 meters or so, it seems that he lost a little rhythm. Just almost seems as if he was stumbling a little bit. And I couldn't believe it, but I was just close behind him. And I think, well, this is the opportunity to catch up. And I just passed by just before crossing the line and winning with a small margin. But it was special.
So not just beating him, doing this on home soil. What was it like getting on the podium singing the South African national?
Oh, I'll never forget it. It's one of those memories I will treasure for a lifetime, really. It was great, especially amongst all the other South African and African athletes. Interesting enough, I was also part of an outreach during that time, and that was also my first exposure to chaplaincy and to outreach. We were distributing also some Christian videos with the Jesus film and testimonies on it of some legends like Ezekiel Sipeng and Penny Haynes. I was humbled for them to also include my testimony. So I've seen the impact of that also. So also for that reason, it was a special event for me.
Yeah, so you're being exposed to other possibilities in terms of ministry, and we'll maybe come to that, your future purpose.
Of course so.
Beyond competition. But, 99, there you are, you've just beaten your arch nemesis. You're in the form of your life, and it's the Sydney Olympics in 2000. So you must have had fairly high expectations going into that.
Oh, definitely so, especially since I was running the best times of my career about 2-3 months prior to that event. And I was also, not that young any longer. So, but I think the experience played a role. Everything was in my favor in a sense. And then came the 24th of October of that year, 2000, the 100-meter semi-final in the Olympic Stadium. My wife, Hanali, and my dad cheering along from the pavilion. I remember it was like a cloudy day. I had a great start. I was running next to the Zimbabwean Elliot Mujaji, who was also one of the favorite athletes to win. And it was the 100 semi-final, and I was in front after 50 meters.
Okay.
And then, unfortunately, disaster struck. The next moment, I just felt an excruciating pain in my thigh, and I sustained a third-degree hamstring tear. And I just
sprinter's nightmare. Right?
Absolutely. It's one of. I mean, we all know that hardships and setbacks and injuries are part of a sports person's life. In a sense, I could have expected it to happen sooner or later. Although I have slight injuries during my career, but nothing compared to this.
Yeah.
And without warning, basically. So I was really astonished. I was overwhelmed. I was, in a sense, disheartened. Not knowing why it happened. And I was asking questions. And all of a sudden, I realized that this was the end of competing in the game. So I went for a sonar afterwards. They assessed the nature and extent, but there was no other choice than to withdraw. And I just remember that night in the Paralympic Village, I was quite alone, and I was struggling, asking various questions, seeking God's face actually to get some guidance and direction of why it had happened. And I must say, it was one of those profound moments in my life. Being alone there at night, reading through some scripture verses and some notes from friends and family, when I discovered in Nehemiah 8 verse 10, where it says, "The joy of the Lord is my strength." And that really touched my heart and made me realize, gave me a total different perspective on what had happened, and just made me aware.
That's key, isn't it? The joy is not found in our circumstances. It's easy to say sitting here right now. It's easy to
say, and I was dreaming of standing on a podium with a medal around my neck, and all of a sudden I was in a wheelchair with my wife sort of assisting me, pushing me around sort of in the city. But I realized that God is still in control, and that He might have a different plan and purpose for me being there. And in retrospect, for people sympathizing with me and asking questions and feeling sorry, there was also an opportunity for me to encourage them and to support them and to play a different role than anticipated in that team. So I should have been there, and it was great for me being there.
So you had this moment with God.
Absolutely.
You wrestled.
I wrestled.
Yeah,
definitely.
You wrestled with God, and I don't think we I've said this on other podcasts. Yeah. Sometimes we want to jump from Good Friday to Easter Sunday, but we have to go through the silence and the questioning and the solitude and anguish of our Easter Saturdays. We can't go round the pain. We have to go through it.
That's a fact.
And I think there's a lesson in that for all of us.
So.
And yet, in the midst of it, you heard God.
Yes.
You heard from the Lord.
Absolutely.
And it sounds to me like you had opportunities almost immediately to begin to serve your teammates.
Amazing. There was a platform set definitely to encourage my teammates and to sort of be an instrument in God's hand. I was not prepared for that, but I realized afterwards that God actually used me in that sort of environment.
So often we fall into the trap of thinking in sport, God can only use me when I'm on the podium.
That's a fact, eh?
Because the world says that. The world says you only matter when you've got a medal around your neck and you're singing the anthem.
Correctly so.
But actually, God is able to use us, and I think this comes through quite strongly in your story.
Yeah. And that's why I believe that God has sort of, since my accident, started to equip me and prepare me also to use me later on. So that was something.
So maybe that's worth going to because I think I was going to ask you about what have you learned about God, but I think we're already getting a sense of that. I think God didn't just turn this accident and the loss of your arm around to widen the possibilities for you with your sport in a way that you could never have imagined.
So.
What you're saying is He's also been using this and this athletics career to prepare you for something beyond competition. Tell us a bit more about that.
Definitely so. If I look and I think about my international career of approximately 10 years, yes, it was rewarding to win some medals, and there was a lot of highlights. But I think the fact that I could meet so many people, some were even competitors or within the world of sport, where friendships were established and sort of a network was created for me also to impact others, and for others also to impact my life during that time, when I realized that there's much more than mere competition. There's a race of life where all of us are competitors, which is so much more important than the physical race. I mean, ultimately, we need to play on the field of life. We need to meet people's needs, basically. So what have I learned about God? I've realized that during this time, and even after the accident, soon thereafter, that God had a very specific plan and a purpose for my life. And that I shouldn't allow pain and suffering and discomfort and that to diminish my faith or disillusion me, but to really see it also as a means for a greater purpose. Yeah. And that God is basically still in control, and that He sometimes, for reasons that I might not understand well, would allow or permit things to happen in my life for good reasons. Sometimes in retrospect afterwards, you only understand it better. Yeah. It reminds me of what Louis Giglio once said, that God paints on a canvas that is bigger than we can see or understand. Yeah. So I had to realize that even if it was actually to deepen my trust in Him, or to draw me closer to Him, or to prepare me for ministry at some time, or to strengthen my character, for instance, or to shape me in ways and means that He wants to use me.
And one of those has been, hasn't it, that you've now, as you've indicated, you serve athletes often in a chaplaincy role.
Absolutely, that's a fact, and that emanates from my exposure to chaplaincy programs in 1999 and 2000. 2000, I was attending chaplaincy activities in a Christian room, for instance, led by Johnny Erickson Tada. Yeah. From the US, who's been in a wheelchair for more than 50 years.
And I want to say, anybody who's listening to this, Google her name and get hold of her book, because she's got a stunning testimony.
That's a fact.
We'll put a link to the book in the notes, because that's a brilliant story.
I mean, I had the privilege, right after our accident, we listened to her music and read her books, and that really encouraged my brother and I during that time of rehabilitation. Then I've met her in 2000, basically, and I have a personal conversation with her and actually expressed my gratitude for what she had meant to me. And something that she said also touched my heart. She one of her quotes is that sometimes God permits what He hates to accomplish what He loves. Wow. Christ in us, our hope of glory. Colossians 1:27, I think. Yeah. And that gave me a total different perspective on life when I've met her, and even had the opportunity some years later in a sport ministry context to visit her ministry in LA and spend some time considering some partnering opportunities as well. So what I've seen there, and the Bible studies and the prayer, that sparked my own enthusiasm and eagerness to also become a chaplain later in my life and be involved in a more structured way in sports ministry.
And of course, you're off to this year's World Champs in Paris.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it was not foreseen, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity as well. I was approached by the organizer of the event, of a chaplaincy program, which is during the Para-Athletic Championships in Paris during the coming July, 6 to 17 of July, amongst 11 others. And this is the pinnacle of what has actually I've been prepared for, in a sense, and was dreaming about. So by God's grace, I'm an accredited chaplain in South Africa, attended a course in 2016, and this is just an opportunity to practice what I've learned and what I've
experienced. We're so proud. There's going to be a South African sports chaplain at the Games in Paris, and who knows, maybe representing in a different way at the next Olympics in Paris. Who knows?
well, who knows? I mean, a year thereafter, there's the Paralympics in the same city. And
absolutely.
wouldn't it be fantastic if we have been afforded another
Absolutely.
opportunity? Yeah, definitely so.
This has been a delightful conversation, but I know that you have a life motto. And I know from listening to another podcast, so if the guys at Christians in Sport in the UK hear me mention this, it's because I heard this on their podcast. But you've got such an inspirational life motto. Would you like to share that with us and maybe give a bit of context as well?
Yes, what happened actually is prior to the Paralympic Games in Sydney 2000, I was approached by one of the organizers in our team, a team manager, I think, and she asked me for a life motto, which would have been displayed at the clubhouse in Sydney,
Wow.
the South African clubhouse, basically. And I was thinking a little bit, and just it came into my mind the following, basically, which later on became like a life motto to me. And it sounds as follows: it's not the arm that I lost that really matters, but all the countless blessings that I have gained in this race of life.
I'm going to ask you to say it again, because I think anybody listening to this is kind of, there's been a holy hush when you've said that. So it's worth hearing again.
I'll repeat it. It's not the arm that I lost that really matters, but all the countless blessings I have gained in this race of life.
Yeah. Yeah. That's powerful. Yeah. The Call Up Prayer Book. Favorite prayer or theme in the book?
Yes, it's actually difficult because there are so many prayers that applies to so many different scenarios. When I read through it, the one that came actually to mind and that touched my heart was a prayer after training, because it's a prayer that we can continue praying, and it also relates to a very special verse for me personally from scriptures, which is 1 Timothy 4 verse 7 and 8. And it says basically that physical training has value, but godliness, training for godliness has much more value, because there's a promise for this life as well as the life to come, basically. So I was thinking that in a sense it was thanking God for testing us in various ways when we train, but it's also a reaffirmation and like a how can I say an opportunity to just consecrate your life once again, focusing and pursuing godliness, which is actually spiritual training or practicing biblical disciplines. And that continues actually. That's beyond even competing on the track or on the field and even the locker room. It's the field of life where we need to meet people's needs. And that prepares us, that kind of a prayer for that, to have that continuous mindset.
That's incredible. And your locker room worship song. We're asking every athlete this.
Also, once again, it was difficult, but this song by Brandon Lake, and the song is has the name Gratitude. And it's a song whereby you just express your gratitude towards God for who He is and for so many blessings in my life. And it says, I lift up my hands. In my instance, it's a singular. I lift up my hand, and I praise You again and again and again. So it's that continuous, just thanking God for each and every blessing in your life. And there's so many for me. Thinking back to after the accident and my family life, my wife, with whom I've been married for more than 30 years, 3 boys in their 20s who are all very special to me, close friendships that have been established, the opportunity to be part of sports ministry on a global level, to lead a global team for the last 10 years, the chaplaincy opportunities emanating therefrom, and even having a full-time job, being a legal advisor. So there's a lot of things to be grateful about. And it says also the song that nothing to give for a king except my heart saying hallelujah, hallelujah. And so I can identify with these words on a
and I
continuous
think
basis.
anybody listening to this will go, they've already picked up on the fact that you live and serve from a place of gratitude.
Thank you.
That
so
song seems very telling.
Absolutely so.
And we're grateful. We're grateful for you. We're grateful for your story and your willingness to share it. And most of all, we're grateful for God who's writing it with you and for you. Niel, it's been an absolute privilege to have you on the Call Up podcast. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Bruce. It's a privilege for me as well, and I really appreciate it.
And God bless you in Paris.
Thank you so much.
Call Up is hosting our very first breakfast where you can meet us in person and guests like JP Duminy. It's on the 20th of May and you can grab a ticket on quicket.co.za and search for the Call Up Sports Breakfast where faith meets sport and life and we get to meet you in person. Don't miss it.
The Call Up Podcast, where faith meets sport and life. This is brought to you by Sports Chaplaincy South Africa.
The Power of His Dream brings you here. LIA Productions.